You ever have one of those quiet moments late at night when everything is still and you open your banking app just to check your balance? Not because you need to, but because you want to. And when you see that number sitting there, untouched, you feel something subtle. Not excitement, not pride in a loud way, just calm. Like you've done something right, like you've built a small shield between yourself and the chaos of life. It feels like control. Like no matter what happens, a job loss, a sudden expense, a bad month, you'll be okay. That feeling is powerful, and to be fair, it's earned. Saving money takes discipline, it takes restraint, it takes saying no when it would be easier to say yes. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't realize. That same money giving you peace of mind might quietly be holding you back. Not in an obvious way, not in a way that triggers panic, but slowly, silently, and consistently. There's a growing group of people today who are doing something interesting. They're not broke, they're not living paycheck to paycheck. In fact, they've done everything right. They've saved diligently, they've built up tens of thousands sitting in their accounts, and yet they're stuck. Because while they've mastered saving, they never made the shift to building. Hi, my name is Brinny, and I spend way much time thinking about why people who look financially reckless are sometimes better prepared for disaster than people who did everything right. If you've ever felt vaguely unsettled about how dependent your entire financial life is on one company, subscribe and hit. If that sounds familiar, what you're about to hear might change how you think about money entirely. Because keeping too much cash sitting still is not neutral. It's not harmless. It comes with a cost, one that most people never calculate. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly how much money actually belongs in your bank and what to do with the rest. Let's start with something that feels safe, but isn't. The first trap is psychological. It's the comfort of seeing a number that never goes down. Cash is predictable. You open your account and it looks exactly the same as yesterday. No volatility, no sudden drops, no uncertainty. That stability feels like safety. But stability and safety are not the same thing, because while your balance stays frozen, the world around it doesn't. Prices change, costs rise, value shifts, and that's where the illusion begins. Imagine holding a block of ice in your hand. It looks solid, it feels stable, but the longer you hold it, the more it melts, even if you don't notice it second by second. That's what idle cash is doing in a low-interest account. It looks intact, but it's shrinking in real terms every single day. Most people underestimate this because nothing visibly happens. There's no red warning, no alert, no sudden drop that forces you to react. It's quiet, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. A lot of this behavior comes from fear, and it's understandable. People have seen markets fall, they've watched investments lose value, maybe even they've experienced it personally. So they make a decision: I'd rather keep my money where it feels safe. But what feels safe in the short term can become risky in the long term, because avoiding visible losses often leads to accepting invisible ones, and invisible losses compound. Another mistake people make is overestimating how much backup they actually need. They think in terms of income instead of survival. There's a big difference between maintaining your current lifestyle and simply staying afloat. An emergency fund isn't meant to fund comfort, it's meant to buy time. Time to think clearly, time to adjust, time to recover. When you strip your expenses down to essentials, housing, food, utilities, minimum obligations, the number is usually much lower than expected. Yet many people keep far more than necessary sitting idle just in case something extreme happens. The problem is you end up sacrificing years of growth to prepare for a scenario that might never occur. There's a balance here, and once you find it, everything changes. Now let's talk about something even more concrete. The second issue isn't psychological, it's mathematical. Let's say you save a large amount of money and leave it untouched. On the surface, nothing changes, the number stays the same, but what that number can actually do changes constantly. Over time, the same amount of money buys less, not slightly less, significantly less. Think about how prices have shifted over just a few years. Food, fuel, housing, transportation, everything has crept upward. And even when increases seem small, they stack over time. This is what makes idle cash uniquely vulnerable. Other assets tend to adjust. Businesses raise prices, real estate values shift, investments grow over long periods. But cash just sits there, It doesn't defend itself. It doesn't adapt. It simply absorbs the impact. And the longer it sits, the more it loses its edge. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people don't think of cash as something that can lose money unless it physically decreases. But losing purchasing power is still losing. It just doesn't feel like it. That's the difference between visible loss and silent loss. And silent loss is far more dangerous because it doesn't trigger action. You don't react to it. You don't adjust. You just accept it without realizing. Now shift your perspective for a second. Think about the effort it took to earn your money. The hours, the stress, the energy. Every dollar represents a piece of your time. So the real question becomes, what is that time doing for you now? If your money is just sitting still, it's not contributing anything back. It's not multiplying. It's not creating opportunities. It's not easing your future workload. It's just there. And that leads into the next idea. Money, when used correctly, can become something powerful. It can become a system that works independently of your time. But only if you allow it to move. Only if you put it in a position where it can grow. Because money doesn't grow by default. It grows when it's placed in environments designed for growth. If you keep it isolated, it stays limited. If you deploy it, it starts to expand. And over long periods, that difference becomes massive. Now, at this point, some people hesitate. They think about risk, and that's valid. Nothing that grows comes without uncertainty. But here's the part that often gets missed. Doing nothing is also a decision, and that decision carries its own risk. You're not choosing between risk and no risk. You're choosing between different types of risk. One is visible and uncomfortable. The other is invisible and gradual. But both are real, and the outcome depends on which one you're willing to accept. Now let's shift into something most people never connect to their bank balance: behavior. The way you see your money directly affects how you use it. And this happens at a subconscious level. When you open your account and see a large number, your brain interprets it in a specific way, not logically, emotionally. It signals abundance, and abundance lowers resistance. Decisions that once required thought become easier. Spending feels lighter, less significant. Because in comparison to the total, everything seems small. And this is where problems begin, not through one big mistake, but through many small ones. A purchase here, an upgrade there, a spontaneous decision that feels harmless in the moment. Individually, they don't matter much, but collectively they shift your trajectory, especially when all your money sits in one place. Because when everything is combined into a single balance, it creates confusion. Money meant for security sits next to money meant for goals. Money reserved for the future feels available in the present. And your brain doesn't separate it. It just sees one number, which means you start dipping into things without realizing, not intentionally, but gradually. And over time, that erodes progress. This is why structure matters more than discipline. Relying on willpower alone is unreliable, but designing your system differently changes everything. When money is automatically divided before you even interact with it, your behavior adjusts naturally. What you see becomes what you can actually use, and what you can't see, you don't spend. This is one of the simplest shifts that creates a massive difference over time, because it removes decision fatigue, it removes temptation, and it aligns your behavior with your goals without requiring constant effort. Now, there's one more angle most people never connect to their bank balance, and it's becoming more relevant every year: access. The easier it is to move your money, the easier it is to lose it. Modern financial threats are no longer obvious. They're sophisticated, fast, and often convincing. They rely on urgency and emotion, and they work best when large amounts of money can be moved instantly. If everything you own is sitting in one easily accessible place, it creates vulnerability. Not because you're careless, but because the system is frictionless. And friction, in this case, is actually protection. When money is distributed across different types of accounts, different levels of accessibility, it creates pause. And that pause can be the difference between a mistake and a realization, between reaction and reflection. So ironically, making your money slightly harder to access can make it significantly safer. Now, stepping back, all of this leads to a simple but important conclusion. More cash does not automatically mean more security. At a certain point, it starts doing the opposite.
It slows growth, it distorts behavior, it increases exposure, and it creates a false sense of stability. Real security comes from balance, from knowing exactly how much you need for stability and allowing the rest to do something productive. In the next part, we're going to break down exactly how to calculate that number with precision and what to do step by step once you find it. Because once you get that right, everything else becomes much clearer.
Let's pick up from where we left off, because this is where things start becoming practical. Up to this point, you've seen the hidden cost of holding too much cash, not in theory, but in how it affects your decisions, your growth, and your long-term position. Now the question becomes simple. If keeping too much is a problem, how much is actually enough? Most people never answer this clearly. They guess, they round up, they add extra just to be safe. And that's exactly how excess builds up. So instead of guessing, we're going to define it properly. The foundation of this entire calculation starts with one thing: clarity. Not rough estimates, not assumptions, real numbers. You need to understand what your life actually costs at its most basic level. Not your current lifestyle with all its comforts, upgrades, and optional spending, but your survival baseline. What does it take to keep your life stable if your income suddenly stops? Think about that for a second. If everything paused tomorrow, your job, your business, your income streams, what expenses would still exist no matter what? Those are the only ones that matter here. Housing, whether it's rent or a mortgage. Utilities, electricity, water, essential services. Food, not dining out, not convenience, just what you need to function. Insurance, health, basic coverage, anything that protects you from larger risks. Minimum debt payments, not aggressive paydowns, just the minimum required to stay in good standing. Transportation, only what's necessary to maintain mobility. That's your core. Everything else is optional. Streaming services, subscriptions, frequent upgrades, lifestyle spending, all of that disappears in this calculation, because this number isn't about comfort, it's about stability. Now here's where most people get surprised. When you actually calculate this using real data, not estimates, the number is often much lower than expected. The easiest way to do this is simple. Go back through your last 2 or 3 months of bank statements. Not mentally, actually look at them. Identify every expense that would still exist in a worst-case scenario. Add them up carefully, then divide by the number of months you reviewed to get a consistent monthly figure. That number is your baseline. This is your true monthly requirement. And this is the number everything else will be built on. Now that you have that, the next step becomes straightforward. You multiply it, not randomly, within a defined range. For most people, that range sits between 3 and 6 months. That's it. Not 12, not 18, not as much as possible. 3 to 6. Why? Because this range covers the majority of real-world disruptions. It gives you time. Time to search for new income, time to adjust your situation, time to make decisions without panic. If your baseline monthly expenses are, let's say, the equivalent of a modest, essential lifestyle, then multiplying that by 3 gives you a short buffer. Multiplying by 6 gives you a more conservative one. Which one you choose depends on your situation. If your income is stable, predictable, and your responsibilities are limited, you lean toward the lower end. If your income fluctuates, or you have dependents, or your situation carries more uncertainty, you move toward the higher end. But here's the key. Once you reach that number, you stop. You don't keep stacking more cash just in case, because beyond that point, you're no longer increasing security. You're increasing inefficiency. You're holding resources in a place where they do less than they could. Now let's go one layer deeper. There's another layer people often miss. Your emergency fund is not the same as your day-to-day money. These are two completely different categories. Your emergency fund is not meant to be touched casually. It exists for disruption. Your day-to-day money, on the other hand, is for planned activity. Your bills, your regular expenses, anything you already know is coming in the next month or two. So, in reality, what should sit in your bank is not just your emergency fund.
It's your emergency fund, plus a short-term buffer for upcoming expenses, usually around 30 to 60 days. That's it. That combination defines your ideal cash position, nothing more. Once you understand this, something interesting happens.
you start seeing your money differently. Instead of one large, undefined pool, it becomes structured. Each part has a role, each dollar has a purpose, and anything without a purpose becomes visible immediately. That's your excess. Now we get to the most important part. What do you do with that excess? This is where the real shift happens, because this is the point where you move from preserving money to growing it. And this transition doesn't have to be extreme. It doesn't require you to suddenly take on massive risk or make complex decisions. It starts with simple allocation. Think of your money like a workforce. Right now, a portion of it is assigned to stability, your emergency fund. That stays exactly where it is. But the rest? It's unemployed. It's not contributing. Your job is to assign it roles, different roles with different purposes. One portion can go toward long-term growth. This is where investments come in. Not speculation, not random decisions, structured, broad exposure to growth over time. Another portion might go toward opportunities, things that can increase your earning ability, skills, education, tools, things that create a return not just once, but repeatedly. Another portion might go toward medium-term goals, things you plan to use in a few years. Each allocation has a timeline. Each timeline has a strategy. And suddenly, your money isn't just sitting, it's moving with intention. Now, a common reaction at this point is hesitation. What if I move it and something goes wrong? That question is natural, but it comes from the assumption that keeping money still avoids problems. It doesn't. It just changes the type of problem you face. Remember this, risk isn't something you eliminate, it's something you manage. And keeping everything in one place doesn't reduce risk, it concentrates it. When you spread your money across different functions, you're not being reckless, you're being strategic. You're aligning each portion of your money with its purpose. Stability stays stable, growth gets the chance to grow, liquidity remains available where needed. Everything becomes intentional. Now, let's talk about implementation, because understanding this is one thing, actually doing it is another. The biggest mistake people make here is trying to do everything at once. They look at their total excess and feel like they need to move it immediately. That creates pressure, and pressure leads to hesitation or poor decisions. Instead, think in phases. You don't need to deploy everything overnight. You can move gradually. Start by identifying your exact excess, then decide how much of that you're comfortable reallocating right now. Not all of it, just a portion. Move that. Let it sit. Observe how you feel. Get used to the idea. Then repeat. Over time, your comfort level expands, your understanding improves, and your system becomes stronger. Another key piece here is automation. If you rely on manual decisions every month, you'll eventually slip. Not because you lack discipline, but because life gets busy. Energy fluctuates, focus shifts. Automation removes that variable. When money is allocated automatically before you even interact with it, consistency becomes effortless. Your system runs whether you're motivated or not, and consistency is what creates results. Now, here's something important to understand. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need the ideal allocation from day one. What matters is movement, progress, shifting from inactivity to intention. Even small changes applied consistently create massive differences over time, because once your money starts working, it doesn't stop. It compounds, it builds on itself, and the earlier you start, the more powerful that effect becomes. So at this stage, you've done something most people never do. You've defined your true needs, you've separated stability from excess, and you've begun the process of putting your money to work. In the next part, we're going to go deeper into where that money can go, how different types of assets behave, and how to think about growth in a way that actually makes sense long term. Because once you understand that, you're no longer guessing, you're operating with clarity. And that's where real financial progress begins.
Now that you've separated what you need from what you don't, everything changes. Because this is the point where money stops being static and starts becoming strategic. Up until now, the focus was protection, stability, making sure nothing breaks if life throws something unexpected your way. But once that foundation is in place, the question shifts. It's no longer, how do I protect this money? It becomes, how do I grow it without losing control? And that's where most people either overcomplicate things or avoid them completely. So let's simplify it. There are only a few places your excess money can realistically go, and each one behaves differently. Not better or worse, just different. The key is understanding what role each one plays. Start with the most straightforward category, long-term growth. This is where your money is given time. Not weeks, not months, years. This is the environment where compounding actually matters. Because compounding is not impressive in the short term. It's almost invisible at first, but over longer periods, it becomes the dominant force. Think of it like planting a tree. For a while, nothing dramatic happens. Small growth, slow progress. But give it enough time, and it becomes something much larger than the effort you initially put in. That's how long-term investing works. It's not about quick wins. It's about consistent exposure over time. Now, here's something important. When people hear investing, they often think of complexity. Picking the right stocks, timing the market, predicting what will happen next. That's not necessary. In fact, trying to be overly precise often leads to worse results because it introduces emotion, and emotion leads to inconsistency. A more effective approach is broad participation, owning a wide range of businesses rather than betting on a few, letting the overall system grow instead of trying to outsmart it. This reduces the impact of any single mistake, and it aligns your outcome with long-term economic growth rather than short-term guesses. Now, does this come with fluctuations? Yes. There will be periods where values drop, moments where everything looks uncertain. That's part of the process. But over extended periods, those fluctuations tend to smooth out, and what remains is growth. Not perfectly linear, but directional, upward. This is where patience becomes valuable, because the biggest gains don't come from reacting. They come from staying consistent while others are reacting. Now, let's move to another category, assets that produce income. These are different from growth-focused investments. Instead of relying primarily on appreciation, they generate something ongoing, cash flow. This could come from various sources, things that produce regular returns over time. The appeal here is psychological as much as financial, because instead of waiting for value to increase, you're receiving something along the way. That can create a sense of progress, a feeling that your money is actively contributing to your life. But there's a trade-off. Income-focused assets may not grow as aggressively as pure growth assets. So again, it's not about choosing one over the other, it's about balance. Growth builds the future. Income supports the present. Now, there's another layer that often gets overlooked, and it's one of the highest return areas available. But it doesn't look like an investment in the traditional sense. That's investing in your own capacity, your ability to earn, your ability to create value that others are willing to pay for. This could be learning a new skill, improving an existing one, building something that generates income beyond your primary source.
The reason this matters is simple. Most financial strategies focus on optimizing what you already have, but increasing what you can generate expands everything. It raises your ceiling, and in many cases, the returns here can exceed anything else. Because improving your earning ability doesn't just impact one year, it compounds across every future year. Now here's where things connect. When you combine these elements, growth, income, and personal development, you create a system, not just a collection of decisions, a system where each part supports the others. Growth builds long-term wealth. Income provides stability and flexibility. Personal development increases your capacity to fuel both, and all of it works together. Now, let's address something that stops people from acting: uncertainty. What if I choose wrong? What if I invest at the wrong time? What if something goes down right after I move my money? These thoughts are common, and they come from a desire to avoid mistakes. But here's the reality. Waiting for perfect conditions usually leads to inaction, because perfect conditions don't exist. There will always be reasons to wait, always something that feels uncertain. The goal is not to eliminate uncertainty, it's to operate despite it. And one of the simplest ways to do that is through consistency. Instead of trying to time everything perfectly, you move at regular intervals. You allocate gradually. You build your position over time. This approach does two things. First, it reduces the impact of short-term volatility because you're not committing everything at a single point. Second, it removes the pressure of being right at any specific moment. You're not relying on timing, you're relying on process, and process is repeatable. Now, let's talk about something practical again, structure. Because without structure, even the best intentions fall apart. You already separated your emergency fund. That stays untouched. Now your excess gets divided, not randomly, intentionally. You can think of it in simple layers. A portion goes to long-term growth. A portion may go toward income-producing assets. A portion may be reserved for opportunities or self-investment. And each portion is handled differently. Different timelines, different expectations, different roles. This clarity removes confusion. It removes hesitation, because you're no longer asking, what should I do with all my money? You're asking, what is this portion meant to do? And that question is much easier to answer. Now, here's another important point. Progress here is not about speed, it's about direction. Some people move aggressively, others move slowly. Both can work. What matters is that you're moving forward, consistently. Because over time, consistency outperforms intensity. Small, repeated actions create results that large, occasional actions cannot. Now think about where you were before this. One account, one number, no clear separation, no defined roles, everything sitting still. Now compare that to this. Defined structure, clear purpose, movement, growth potential, reduced behavioral friction. It's a completely different system. And once this system is in place, something interesting happens. Your relationship with money changes. You stop obsessing over the balance in your bank account, because that number is no longer the full picture. It's just one piece, a controlled piece. Your focus shifts to the overall system, how everything is working together, how it's progressing, how it's evolving. And that shift is important, because real financial security doesn't come from one number. It comes from how everything is structured, how everything is aligned, and how consistently it's executed. Now, in the next and final part, we're going to bring everything together. You'll get a clear, simple framework you can apply immediately, a way to define your exact numbers, structure your accounts, and move forward without overthinking every decision. Because once you have that, you don't need to keep revisiting the same questions. You just follow the system and let it do what it's designed to do.
Now let's bring everything together in the simplest way possible, because at this point, you don't need more theory. You don't need more ideas. You need clarity, a clear line between what stays and what moves, a clear structure that removes guesswork, something you can actually apply without overthinking every step. So, let's define it. There are only two categories your money should fall into: money that must stay still and money that must move. That's it. Nothing in between. The first category is your foundation. This is your safety layer, and it has a very specific purpose. It exists to protect you from disruption, not to grow, not to impress, not to sit there endlessly increasing, just to protect. This includes your emergency fund and your short-term spending buffer. Your emergency fund is calculated based on your essential monthly expenses, not your lifestyle, not your income, your actual baseline. You already know how to get that number. You multiply it within your range. And once it's built, you stop. You don't keep adding just a little more. You don't let it grow without reason, because beyond its purpose, it becomes inefficient. Now add your short-term buffer, the money you already plan to use within the next 1 to 2 months. Bills, upcoming expenses, things that are already expected. When you combine these two, you get your total stay still amount. That's the maximum that belongs in your bank at any given time. Everything else falls into the second category, money that must move. This is where growth happens. This is where your future gets built. And this is where most people hesitate, because movement introduces uncertainty. But here's the shift you need to make. Movement is not the enemy. Unstructured movement is. When money moves without a plan, it becomes risky.
When it moves with purpose, it becomes powerful. So instead of thinking, where should I put all my money? Break it down. Give each portion a role. Start with long-term growth. This is your core, the portion designed to expand over time. It doesn't need constant attention. It doesn't need frequent changes. It needs consistency, regular contributions, patience, and time. That's what allows compounding to do its work. Then consider your flexibility layer, money that isn't locked into long timelines, but also isn't sitting idle. This gives you options, opportunities, the ability to act when something valuable appears without disrupting your foundation. Then there's your personal expansion, the part most people underestimate, because it doesn't always look like an investment, but it might be the most important one: improving your skills, increasing your income potential, building something of your own. This doesn't just grow your money, it grows your ability to generate more of it, and that changes everything. Now, once these roles are defined, the next step is structure, because without structure, even the best plan fades. You need separation. Not everything sitting in one place, not one account showing one large number. Different buckets, different purposes. Even if it's simple, even if it's just a few clear divisions, because what you see influences what you do. When your spending money is isolated, you spend clearly. When your savings are separated, you protect them naturally. When your investments are distinct, you stop interfering with them unnecessarily. Clarity changes behavior. Now let's make this even more practical. Think about your next paycheck. Before it arrives, decide where it goes. Not after, before. Because once the money hits your account, your brain switches into consumption mode. It starts evaluating options, spending possibilities, short-term decisions. But if the allocation is already defined, that phase never happens. The money moves automatically into the roles you've already assigned. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to rely on discipline. The system handles it. And over time, this becomes normal. You adjust to what remains, just like people do with anything consistent. Now, here's something important to remember. You don't need to get this perfect. You don't need the ideal percentages. You don't need to optimize every detail from day one. What matters is that you stop doing nothing, that you stop letting excess sit without purpose. Because inactivity is where the real cost exists, not in making small mistakes, but in not moving at all. Now take a step back and look at the full picture. Before, your sense of security came from one number, your bank balance. Now it comes from structure, from knowing that you have enough set aside for real emergencies. You have a system directing your money automatically. You have portions working toward growth. You have flexibility when you need it. And you're increasing your ability to earn over time. That's real security, not a static number, but a dynamic system. One that adapts, one that grows, one that protects you while also moving you forward. And once you have this in place, something changes. You stop chasing the feeling of having enough in your bank because you realize that feeling was misleading. Instead, you start focusing on progress, on direction, on how everything is evolving. And that creates a different kind of confidence, not fragile, not dependent on a single number, but built on understanding. Now here's the final idea I want to leave you with. If all your money is sitting in one place doing nothing, you are working for your money. But when your money is structured, allocated, and moving with purpose, your money starts working for you. And that shift is what separates stagnation from growth. It's what turns effort into momentum, and it's what builds something that lasts. So the next time you open your banking app and you see that number, don't just ask yourself if it looks good. Ask yourself a better question. Is it doing its job? Because once every dollar has a job, everything else starts to fall into place.